everybody. Welcome to the Underwater Photography Show. I am Matthew Sullivan.
And I'm Alex Mustard.
And today we're going to do a little discussion on the Retra Pro Max Flash, which is Retra's newest in a, at this point, kind of long line of strobes. So Alex, you have one there, so if you want to take it away.
Yeah, I think with Retra's, Retra are an engineering company. And I think a little bit like iPhones, when they can think of a way to improve their product, because they're making them in relatively small batches, you get a new version. So I think that the Retra Pro series has, I think, had 3 iterations now, and this is the 3rd of those iterations. It doesn't mean that each one is a new rulebook. It's just simply they've thought of some ways to make it significantly better based on what they've learned from the previous ones, either in manufacturing or how it's performed in the field. So they're kind of all steps on. This one, though, I would say is quite a significant step because it's had a really major redesign. It uses a slightly different flash tube from its predecessors, and it has a different battery compartment fitment to its predecessors as well. And it also has a little LED screen on the back, which makes it, I guess, from the first day you use it, easier to understand than the color lights that the previous version used. But I have to say, it doesn't take very long to learn color lights. So I would have been quite happy without the LCD screen on the back. But it's cool that strobe's got an LCD screen on it, which is of interest. What I would say, the sort of the big difference you notice from a previous Retra is the flash output is actually matched to be the same as the previous generation. They've actually done that by reducing the power drain of the strobe a little bit, so the battery life is really quite a lot better than the earlier generations, particularly compared to the original Pro. It's really noticeably better. But they've done that partly by more efficient lighting and just more efficient use of the power in the flash. And you really see a big difference as a user. It doesn't really matter how they've done it. But the light output is matched to those. They could have turned the wick up and made it a little bit brighter, but they just felt that there's a good chance people might be mixing and matching them. And this whole Pro series, it was better that they all matched each other. So they were all basically interchangeable. The battery compartment on these, what they've done is these batteries are powered by AA batteries, which many people like. Some people, prefer other battery sources. I'm not necessarily going to that. The previous versions, the AA's would sort of go into the strobe like that. If you imagine my fingers are the batteries, and then you'd have the cap on. And then with the Retras, they had the idea that you can add an extra 4 batteries on the back and have double the battery capacity and half the recycle time. So that's an exciting thing to be able to use when you need it. With this battery, knowing that was going to be with this strobe, knowing that was going to be part of the design, they made that first set of batteries go much further inside the strobe. So as a result, they kind of finish about here. And actually, the battery cap actually pushes down. If I take it off, you'll probably see. You'll see it pushes down inside the strobe to be able to actually make the contacts. When I pull this out, you see it actually goes all the way down inside the strobe to connect to the batteries. And that means when you put the second set of batteries in, they only stick out about this far. And all 8 are in the same compartment, which means that when you come to change them, you just undo the battery tap, turn the strobe upside down, all 8 fall out, you stick them on the chargers, and within a few seconds, you're ready to recharge. And I like that change. It makes working with the 8 batteries really, really easy. Honestly, I can get all 8 on charge, and the battery, the cap just goes on and off super fast. It's double O-ringed, as you can see. It's just got a nice steady turning rate, and it's on. And you can get those and get them on the chargers literally in 30 seconds or so. It's really, really fast. I really like that. What I like most about the Retras is that they're not too huge. I mean, I'm holding it forward so you can see it, but it's not a particularly big strobe. Yeah. And that is great for travel. It's also great for strobe positioning, particularly when you want the strobes in tight to the housing. But it doesn't lack for power, despite all of that. I like the fact that I only need to own 1 set of strobes for my macro and wide angle. And if I'm doing macro diving and cold water diving, I run them with just 4 batteries in. 4 batteries will last me as long as I want in those conditions. And because I'm not using as much power for that type of shooting, when I'm doing big, bright sunshine, wide angle, and I need loads of strobe power, I use them with 8 batteries in them. And so, depending on the trip, depends on how many batteries I'm traveling with. Depending on the trip, depends whether I'm going to take the superchargers or not. They're called boosters now on these new ones. So that's kind of my view on it. I've not, friends with Retra. I'm not paid by Retra or anything. I'm not, they don't think they have an ambassador program or anything like that. But I'm friends with them. I I use the Retra strobes and I want them to be as good as possible for my own photography. So I have, told them what I like. They do much of what I like, and they ignore some things that I like because they have other photographers who want opposing things or different things, or they have that also have their own view on how they want their products to be. But they're the strobes that I currently choose to use, and those are kind of the reasons why. But I know, Matt, you've kind of looked at them more objectively than me, and I'm really keen to hear how you found them. And I know you've also got an article coming out soon on DPG about them as well. So maybe you can give us a few secrets ahead of time.
So I still own a pair of the original Retras from, I think they were released in 2017. And back then I thought they were a fantastic strobe. They didn't have the round flash tube. It was a rectangular one, but the light was still really nice, especially when you used it with any of their like they had 3 or 4 different kinds of diffusers. I used them for everything from cold water, macro, wide angle, warm water, bright blue, all that kind of stuff. Never had an issue with them. And I really like the ergonomics. They have those big flat dials on them that were really nice. Then there was the Pro, which I was fortunate enough to get one of the first ones to just kind of play around with and review. And you could immediately see a difference in the light quality. It was much better than the original. But as you touched on, the battery life was pretty atrocious. And if you didn't have the supercharger on there, it drained those batteries very quickly, to the point where it was kind of unenjoyable. But now I have the superchargers for the ones that I'm reviewing. I've used them. I've honestly spent more time not using them because they've seemed to have figured out, like you said, that battery drain problem. So I don't even think about it anymore. I just toss in the 4 AA's, go out and shoot, and I haven't had to think about, I haven't had to worry about managing the battery necessarily. And admittedly, I'm not shooting huge reef scenes.
You've got no range anxiety. So
yeah. But one of the things that I think is really underrated, at least with strobes, is the ergonomics on them. Because everybody watching this probably remembers the Einon Z240, decent strobe, but the ergonomics were awful, and it had that stupid button on it that nobody could figure out, and it would get stuck down and stuck up, and the dials are really small. The new Pro Max has those really long, grippy dials, so even with gloves on, they're easy to turn. I love the hard stops on for each power setting. Retra's all about the light, and the lighting from it is probably the best. I haven't shot like the CCAM 160s or anything like that, but straight out of the strobe, and especially with the diffusers, the light quality is really, really nice. And that beam is so wide and soft that, obviously you still want your strobes to be positioned as perfectly as possible, but if they're not, if you're shooting wide angle at least, and they're a little cockeyed or they're in the wrong spot, the beam is so wide and forgiving that it kind of makes up for it. So if you accidentally knock a strobe or something like that, or you don't have them quite in the right position, you can get away with it a lot easier with the Pro Maxes than you could with other strobes that I've shot. And there are probably instances if I had the big battery pack powered strobes, there might be instances or specific shoots where I would grab those instead just for the battery life and the recycle time. But if you're grabbing an all-around strobe just to go shoot, the Pro Max might be the one that I'd grab first, just because between wide angle and macro, you have all of Retra's lighting tools. You have the reduction rings, the macro rings, the reflectors, the snoots. There isn't really another strobe out there that has all of those different light modifiers. And especially with a lot of the shooting I do in murky or not great water, those are really important. And some of the other strobes have them, but they don't have necessarily the bayoneted front. They don't work as seamlessly because it's not this, like Retra has their snoot and their strobe. They work well together. So it's one of my favorite strobes that I've used. I'm much more eloquent in my actual written review of it that's coming out soon, but It's a beautiful piece of underwater equipment, and they're just fun to look at. They're nice and shiny and sleek. Um, the one little quirk
Mine are
to
a
be
bit
aware
beaten
of.
up, I think, from too much diving. But I mean, yeah, one
One
thing I'd say, just you were talking about the buttons before. One thing I push them to do is is to make the buttons flat so you can feel them, because I don't want to have to look at my strobe. And
Yep.
also, it's always been the case that the one you need to turn the most is the one that sticks out more. So the
Yeah.
two dials on the back don't stick out the same amount, and the one that sticks out the furthest, which is the one that you're going to adjust the most, is the power setting one.
Yep.
And I think that's really good because it means that you can be on your camera and you can reach out to the different strobe arms and make those changes while you're still watching the subject through the viewfinder. You don't have to pull your whole rig in front of you and click, click, click. And I think that's a really valuable aspect in the ergonomics.
One little quirk to be aware of that I wasn't aware of, so maybe this will help somebody else, is when you turn the strobe on, you
Oh,
can't
yay.
just go right to on. You have to go to, I think it's like the battery test level first.
Mm.
Wait till it registers, and then you can turn it on. So if you just try to go all the way to whatever power setting you want or on right away, it won't do that. And then you'll think you've broken the strobe as soon as you take it out of the box, like I did.
Yeah, no, I think this is. I would say this is for me a big criticism of the flashes. It's not like it doesn't ruin you. Once you know what it is, it's not a big deal. But it's the way I think that the complex electronics inside that manage everything boot up. And Retra have done a lot of really clever stuff behind the scenes with these strobes. Like they've put a lot of effort in keeping flash duration the same at different flat power settings. They've also, which almost no strobe in the world does, they've put a lot of effort into keeping the color temperature of the strobe the same at different power settings. What you would ever find if you ever use a color temperature meter with a strobe is any strobe, if you turn it up and down, the color temperature varies a lot. So strobe manufacturers quote their color temperatures for you. And then if you actually go and use their strobes, the color temperature is nearly always quoted at the lowest power because the strobe is warmer when it's on low power. And as you turn the power up, it basically, as it tries to squeeze more and more light out, it gets more and more bluer, which we don't usually like as underwater photographers. Retra, one of the reasons they have that complicated electronics inside is it allows them to manage those aspects of the strobe beam. So they've got really consistent color temperature all the way through the power settings, which they don't really shout about, but it's something that they feel that their photographers would just see that extra quality in their shots, and they don't really care to, it's too complicated an issue to explain in a marketing spiel, so they don't tell anyone about it, but they know the photographers, it'll make photographers happy. But in order to do that, I think in the current firmware, they've got that slow startup time, and I think they're going to work on a fix for it. And one of the things that we haven't mentioned is that the Retra strobes, you can connect them to the Retra app on Bluetooth. And you can update them. I've updated loads of them in the field, even on liverboards where we don't have Wi-Fi. As long as you've got the latest version on the app on your phone, you can update as many flash guns as you want and things like that. It's a really good troubleshooting system for Retra as well. If you're in the field and having problems with your flash gun, they can connect it to base. I know that they've often written little patches to fix certain people's flash guns. You can turn off features and turn on features within the strobe with that app as well, which if something's causing you problems, you can get rid of. A criticism, yeah, so I don't like that switch on. One thing I would say about so when you turn it on, instead of going straight to on, what you need to do is just click it to test and then click it on, and that's enough time, and then it turns on perfectly fine. If in the middle of the dive you want to shoot some silhouettes, you don't want any flash, don't turn the strobe off. Otherwise, when you turn it on again, you have to go through that process. Just turn it back to battery test. It won't fire in that mode, and then you can do your things, and then you just come back to this one, and you don't have to wait for that reboot. So just remember, you just turn it back one click, and that's enough when you're wanting to shoot silhouettes, and then back to M for normal shooting afterwards. I wish that Retra have got, I think, 3 models in their range. And I wish that, and I think they're differentiated by slightly different power settings or something like that. And I understand why they do it, but I sort of resent as a pro shooter having to pay to have TTL in my flash guns. And one of the things I really like about some of the flashes that have come out of China recently is that they are manual only and celebrated the fact that they're manual only. And I think that at a pro level strobe like Retra, I know there are a very vocal proportion of our community who like TTL, but I just feel we're all paying an extra $100 for our strobes so that they've got TTL circuitry and all that complicatedness in it. And yeah, I'd really like a company like Retra or any of them to say, as we've been seeing from the Chinese manufacturers, to go out there and say, the serious shooters don't want TTL. No one's using it who's serious. Why don't we just save everyone a lot of time, a lot of effort, and significant development money in not having all that extra electronics in there to make TTL happen? And I think, and I just think it would make it simpler. It would make it easier than just a pure manual flash. I'm sure there's probably some good engineering reason why actually I've got to have TTL if I want HSS and things like that. But I would love to be able to pay $100 less and not have to have TTL, which I think which hopefully there might be a bit of a following for with those new strobes.
Just one thing to keep in mind too is that if anybody is still shooting electronic sync out there, is you need a whole separate part if you want to shoot those guys with electronic sync, which I believe Retra has. It's fiber optic only. It's less of an issue now. Most people are shooting fiber optic, but just something to be aware of if you are still shooting with sync cables or prefer to shoot with sync cables, you'll need an extra part from Retra.
Yeah, it's kind of like a little electrical to optical converter that actually just screws onto screws onto the flash, to the sync socket, into where the LED the sensor that senses that flash down this fiber optic. You just screw on basically a mini flash trigger onto here that takes the electronic sync and makes a small flash inside it. So it's
like the opposite of the Icolite fiber optic converters, where that one goes electronic to fiber optic. Same thing, just backwards.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a beautiful strobe, and it's not cheap, but I think they're going to be really popular, especially once people start using them and raving about them. But
the final point I make about Retra is that until Retra came along, the top strobes out there in the market were relatively few and far between. And I, for years, shot with Subtronic strobes, then with CCAM strobes. And for all that period, I felt I had a significant lighting advantage over the average underwater photographer. And what annoys me about Retra is ever since they've been on the market, everyone now has the same quality of light for their shooting as I have. And, I feel like I've really lost an advantage that I had baked in because other people wouldn't pay the top money for the strobes. But Retra have produced a strobe that's a lot cheaper than the old CCAM and Subtronic strobes ever were, but has got that same light. And it's it's a frustration for some of us that everyone has now got that capability. But I think on that note, it's probably a pretty good place for us to end. So thank you again for watching the Underwater Photography Show. And we'll be back again soon. So look out for us on YouTube. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.